Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're on page 1334. Yesterday we did the paragraph that began in 1333 through 1334. Let's just sum that up. So in this context and the continuation of the theme of the third form of transformation that comes from within, which means that it is the revealing of the sheirish, of the root of concealment in the Helam Ha'atzmi. And that concealment is from the Helam Ha'atzmi into the Rishimu, which is the root of the containers, the Koyach HaGvul. Not the Oyer, not the Yud within the Avir of the Rishimu, but the very Avir itself, the very Rishimu itself. The Oyer also has the power to transform, but that's a transformation that comes from Oyer, from light. But one that comes from within, because it's a koyach nelam, helam ha'atzmi, which is specifically through tshuva. So the Rebbe Rashab said, to explain that, yesh lahagdim, what we talked about, the pasuk, where it talks about how Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, hine mokim iti, that space is with me, or space mokim iti. In other words, I'm not occupying space. It's not I am within space, but space is within me, as Rashi says. So which means, and you will stand on the rock, and then he talks about the crevice within the rock. So, and that's when God reveals to Moshe the 13 attributes of compassion, which is the essence of Yom Kippur, which reaches the power, as we're learning here, to the deepest source that can forgive any sin and transform the negative to the positive, transform zachis, zdeinus l'zachis, deliberate sins into merits. So he explained what exactly is this space, mokim, and what exactly is the sur, the rock. So first I'll just go over briefly the sources that he brought and then explain it. So he brought from the Zohar that this mokim, iti, is a concealed place, the lo yisiyad klal, beyond any type of comprehension or consciousness, you can even say, which is exactly what we learned earlier. That's helam ha'atzmi, essentially. It's lo yisiyad klal. It's completely beyond any form of revelation. In the Emek, then he brings that there's two ways to explain Mokim. In the Emek HaMelech, he says Mokim is the Mokim Ponei, the space where all existence is created. But what is that space itself? And that's Mokim Humakim Shalela. That God is that space. That space is basically within God. God created a space for existence. That's what Mokim means here. But then we don't yet know what exactly is the mokim. So the Ayin Beis says the mokim is the Igul Hagadol. It's the space around the space, so to speak. In other words, it's the energy around that allows the room for the space. That's Mokim Humakim Shalela. That God is the space, is the space, but mokim iti, the space is with me, the space I'm creating to allow existence is the energy, the Igul Hagadol, that's the Erachol around the space. But the Arizal interprets it differently. In Likutei Torah Arizal, he interprets it that Mokimiti, Tevin B'Seidat Tzimtzum, that this is the Mokim B'Teich Eshat Tzimtzum. It's B'Teich, that not the divine energy that allows for the space, but it's the actual space itself, which is the empty space, which we know is not empty, is the Rishimu. So from that we understand is the Rishimu that remains after the Tzimtzum. So those are the two opinions. And that's he refers to also in Eitz Chaim refers to that mokim. So these are the two opinions about mokim. Okay. Then he continued to explain that the Das Arizal is mashabetecha chol ze b'chinas mokim. Later we're going to learn what he adds in the parentheses. Who became that what means who became shalel? What is mokim iti then? That's referring to ein eid, that not referring to the divine energy. In other words, the Emek HaMelech mokim would really be Oyer. According to the Likutei Torah Arizal, Mokim is really Choshech, the space, the empty space, which is the Rishimu, which is fundamentally dark, even though it has encompasses in it Oyer also, but we're talking about now the Etzem Rishimu. And he's going to explain later, so what does it mean that Einoid, Afil B'Chalo, that even in that darkness also lies the divine. Which divine? The Helam Ha'atzmi. So according to the Emek HaMelech, it wouldn't be the Helam Ha'atzmi, the Mokim. According to the Arizal, or the Likutei Torah Arizal, it would be. That would be that level. But he says, Kamoshi Isbar, that will be explained later. And then he goes on. Based on this, we also understand the second part of the verse. What does it mean? That you'll stand on the brak. So he says, sur, he's going to compare sur to the mokim. Because sur is also the source. He says, mokim meitzeh eish, sur refers to like not just a rock, it's a rock that is the source of all fire. Like surah chalomish, like a flintstone. So I actually looked it up in Likutei Torah that he quotes. Likutei Torah, this whole piece is from Likutei Torah, Parsha Achrei, on the Maimer that's called Ki B'Yem Hazeh Yechaper, the first Maimer of Ki B'Yem Hazeh Yechaper. He elaborates on this concept here. So whatever goes on Sur is all taken from that Maimer, primarily that Maimer at least. So what is that? It's not just a rock. It's a rock as it's a source for Sha'esh. But the source is not a direct source, meaning like it's not like a coal or like you see a flame and from the flame is a source for the sparks. We're talking about a source that is a concealed, fundamentally state of concealment. Just like he said before in the Zohar, Gon is the loyas yad klal. Why? Because the Flintstone is a helim she'ena b'mitzias, b'koyach v'lei b'poel. So we're talking about God's power to create, and that's why God is referred to Tzur. That God is koy gevurah ka'esh, is the words that sustain existence are compared to flames. These flames are coming from the power of God to create. The shorshe havoya, the root of creation, all comes behelam v'lei b'koyach. That's all referring to the tzur. So in a sense, the mokim that we spoke about before is the space where the reshimu is. He's comparing the tzur to that. He didn't say it explicitly, doesn't say it explicitly, but it's very clear it's the same type of level. And then he reconciles this also, or at least not reconciles, it's not a contradiction. He actually brings the Rambam to support this. That the Chena Rambam, Amir Nevuchim, in his own language, he says when it's after tzur calls koyach habayra, because tzur is called dover v'aschalose, is the root of everything and the beginning of everything. However, not like a beginning, like a mocker, like when you say one is the beginning of two, like you say, let's say the beginning of a series. So you say, okay, here's a series of 10. One is the beginning and it ends with 10. Or here's a series of, let's say, $100. So here's $1, $2, $3 till we get to $100. Here, the mocker, the shadish, the aschola, he says, is muvdal. Shemenu nimtza kol, avaleshu as tchilas lehem, ki muvdal lehem legami. And you can't even call it a source to a source because it's not an identifiable source. It's, so to speak, removed, but everything originates from there. So when you say God, for example, is creator, you're saying he's the creator of everything, but that doesn't mean he has something in common with the creation, besides the fact that he creates it. So you could have something that is the beginning of something and there's something very much in common because they're the commensurate to each other. But here we're talking about it's not even a mocker. And that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is called Sur. He brings the different verses. And this also connects Sur to the word why rock? Because a rock refers to Teikif. The Teikif is the power, the strength, and Yechelis and capacity. So strength and power is not just strength and power as an intensity, but also in full, it has the power to do anything. HaYechelis, Kol Yachol. So that's the source of creation, Mimcha Kol Yachol, to create. And that means when it's Safta Latzur, when he tells Hashem to Moshe, he says, God is saying to Moshe, because when he was wanted to show him the Yud Gimel of the Midas Harachim, he says, you have to stand on this tzur, because this tzur is this level of strength and power, the source of all of existence, which is where the Yud Gimel Midas Harachim are rooted. And here he finally says, tzur is the level of Butzina de Kardanisa, which is Gevurah the Atik, which is manifest in Meiches Tema, from which then the Meisrei Meichel leads to the Yud Gimel Tikkun Dikna, which is the level of the 13 attributes of compassion. So just a few words about Butzina de Kardanis. I mentioned it a number of times. We learned about it, as I said, on the top of page, a few pages back right here, page 1330. He also called it, there he was talking about it in the context of the Rishimu. But sin is like a keli. That's what he said there. It's a keli. Now, let me just tell you this. Butzina de Kardanissa is a mysterious entity that's referred to a few places in Zohar, but primarily the one I'm referring to is right in the beginning. We mentioned Bereish Menusa de Malka, which means in the beginning when you had the desire or the reshus of the king to create, it arose in his desire. The Ola B'Ritzene we learned before, that now it's arisen in his desire to create. So he's relating to creation, but it's still within his desire, within his ratzon. And that's when he allocates the resources and envisions it, etc. The 10 hidden spheres. So Golav Gelifa B'Tirei Law, he engraved in Tirei Law, which is like Mitzarayim. Tirei is like the midday, in the brightness above, he engraved the 10 hidden spheres. These are like essentially the 10 hidden spheres engraved within the vision of God as he's envisioning and desiring existence. Okay. But then he says the words Butzina de Kardanissa. What did he engrave? So he uses the word Butzina de Kardanissa. Golav Gelif B'Tirei Law, Butzina de Kardanissa. So the Derech Emes, the Arizal's commentary there, the students of the Arizal, so they teach three ways. What is Kardanissa? Butzina means a nitzutz, a spark, a flame. That we know. But what is Kardanissa? So they bring three interpretations there. One, Kardanissa from the word hard. So there's a thing called the hard de Kardanissa. Anything that is considered hard, like teikif, and strength is called Kardanissa. So basically it would be called nitzutz chazak. That's what they say. A powerful or a hard spark, or a powerful spark, something with intensity in it. That's why he's referring to it as Gevuros, the Atik. I'll get to the Atik in a moment. Okay, so that's one interpretation. Another is the Kardanissa, not from the word Kardanissa, from the word Kadronissa, that it should say Kadronissa, Kadar is Cheshach. So that would be called a dark flame, a dark spark. So it refers to a spark that's in a dark state, similar to the concealment that we're talking about here. And there's a third interpretation that Kardanissa comes from the word mishkal, moided. Like kav amida, it measures. Because like the kav, it measures everything exactly like a scale that measures. So butzin de Kardanissa means a flame that measures. Now, all three can be are interconnected according to Chesed, but I'm only mentioning it because just to give a little more picture. The Tzemach Tzedek in Parsha Shalach and Erateda discusses what is this Butzin de Kardanissa, because on one hand it seems like it's the kav, because it's a flame or a light, Butzina, and but he questions whether it's the kav or not, and there he says that if it's the kav, then why do we call it Gevuros the Atik? Gevuros the Atik is a lot lower than the kav. So he explains, based on the Eitz Chaim that we've learned earlier, that on the top of the kav is also considered like an Atik that's above Ak. So it's Gevuros the Atik as it is in the head of the kav. And if you remember before, the head of the kav was the Yud. The Yud, like that's the root of Chachma. But here we're not talking about how it's in Gilui, in kav, we're talking about how it's in the root in Chesed and Chachma Stima. Like he says, Gevuros the Atik amaluvish b'moiches Stima. So there, it's in a concealed form. In other words, it's either the Yud within the Rishimu, or you could even say deeper, which in the Kardanissa is the actual Rishimu itself, which is the state of concealment, which is rooted in the Helama Atzmi, which sounds more like what he's saying here. Now, maybe this was maybe a little quick in summing it up. I just wanted to lay it out a bit more because he's using that term. So there are it's sources. I just quoted some of the sources. If you need more on this, I could talk about it later. It's not so critical to understand the whole theme here. I just wanted to explain a little more about Butzin de Kardanissa. Just like I did a series on Rishimu, I think I did one of the Chassidus questions on my life a few years ago. I elaborated what is Butzin de Kardanissa based on what I just summed up right now. But regardless, to sum up what he said, he explains that Sur, even though, again, he doesn't say that's the level of Mokim, Hine Mokimiti, but we understand now the flow of the Pasuk. What does it mean? Space is with me, and then he continues, and you will stand on the rock. What connection is between space and the rock? But now that we understand the Kabbalistic, the mystical root of it, so the space is the space of the Rishimu according to the Arizal. This state of the Rishimu, which is a Mokimiti, Shebetecha Cholol, And rock is also referring essentially to the same level. You'll stand on the rock because this Rishimu is the source for everything that would come later, like we learned earlier. However, it's of concealment, it's removed. So therefore, if you want to be able to be Magala, the Yud Gimel Midas Harachim, which has the power to transform darkness into light from within the darkness, you have to stand inside that so-called dark, concealed space, which is also referred to the rock where the fire is concealed in a helam she'ena b'mitzias, like a flintstone. So it's all referring to a level that is beyond revelation, and from there comes the power of Yud Gimel Midrachim to transform. But we're going to learn more. As I said, this is going to continue now until page 1334. 38. We're now on 30, another 3-4 pages where then he'll conclude our topic. But this is the essential picture. So I thought it was important to sum up before we read on. Any questions? Actually, I never saw this anywhere, but what's interesting to me now, can we say that there's two opinions? Sinne de Kardenisse, is it the Kav or is it the Rishimu? And Eira Teira Shlach, which is a very fundamental mimer there, I don't think he mentions Rishimu at all. He just speaks about two opinions, what Sinne de Kardenisse is. I have to look it up some more. And I'll let you know what I find. So let's continue. So we're on page 1334. The new paragraph, Ulahavin Zeh. So to understand this, just a second, just an adjustment. Okay. So Ulahavin Zeh, to understand this, what we just discussed, the gam, and also to understand Lama Yikru Yud Gimel Midas Harachimim. Why are they called the 13 attributes of compassion or mercy? Ma'achar shein Tzimtzumim kemosh la'asayros. We just said that they're in a state of Tzimtzum, and I'll explain that now in a moment. From there come the Yud Gimel Tikkun Dikna. So let's explain this a bit more with a little more elaboration, and you'll understand what he's trying to continue here. This goes back to something I said yesterday, that everything in the physical world is rooted in the spiritual. This is vital, because whenever we learn Kabbalah, and when Chesed quotes Kabbalah, it's always, especially for beginners who learn it for the first time, it throws you how graphic and physical the descriptions are in Kabbalah. Everything is talked about very much in physical terms. Like you say, the sinus, the hair, or you say things like zivug, gufni, the physical union between chochmah and bina, intimacy. That's why the Baal Shem Tov made a statement, and the Tzemach Tzedek brings it right in the beginning of Sherish Mitzvah Satfila, why it was important to be careful when learning Kabbalah, lahafshit megash miyusam, because Kabbalah is assuming that you already know all the introductions and you're not going to anthropomorphize these ideas and turning them too physical. Because this was the mistake of many people, whether it was the Frankists, Jacob Frank, or the Shapside Phoenix, where they took Kabbalah and they made it literal. That just like there's a yichud between a brother and sister in Zoh and Malchus, there could be, God forbid, incestuous relations down below, to put it quite bluntly. Completely not only misunderstanding, but distorting the very essence of Kabbalistic ideas. So therefore, it's critical to have the proper introductions and the subtleties to abstract that in physical terms is only for us to be able to relate to it like an example, like Mepsari Echza Laka. So in truth, when we say that the human being was created in the divine image, what does that mean exactly? We're talking about the soul, that the soul is Vayipach Ba'apav Nishmas Chayim. So that's understandable, that God breathed his spirit into the piece of earth, that the clump of earth that God gathered, and a human being, as the Alter Rebbe explains in chapter 2 in Tanya, that Vayipach comes from within, innermost energy, and that created Chelik Elokam Mal Mamish, the soul of a human being, is the flame of God. using the pasuk from Mishlei, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. So that you could say, so the soul is created in the image of the divine, meaning it has divine qualities, transcendent qualities. It's not just a physical body that's busy with survival. It's a divine entity. Good. But Tzelem Elokim doesn't just refer to the soul. It also refers to the body. That's why Mipsari Echzelakah, from my flesh I behold God. The body was also created by God. So indeed, Kabbalah explains, and Chesed elaborates, how each part of the body corresponds to the Eivarim de Malka expression. Ramach Eivarim of a person, the 248 limbs of a person, correspond to the 240 limbs of Malka, of the king, meaning the divine king. Now, what does that mean? God doesn't have limbs, God forbid, just like God doesn't have physical attributes. But just like we say with the Spheres, in the words in the Tanya, chapter 3, where he says, the 10 faculties of a human being, nishtalshlu mehen, evolved from the 10 spheres and divine attributes. So basically, the Eibishter himself is beyond attributes and definitions and limbs and organs and any type of structure. But he chose Koyach HaGvul. Remember the Koyach HaGvul, he chose and has the capacity to create finite entities and finite attributes. And he manifests in them. Obviously, he's always beyond them. That's why we always say that he's lav inun midus iu klal. He's not defined by them, but he unites with them. So there's a thing called Chesed shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Chasdei Yisbarach, Gevuros shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is like the Shem Kael. Kael is a name of God. Shem Elokim is a name of God. Havaya is a name of God. Tzvokes, Shaddai, and so on. So these are names of the divine. It's the way God manifests in structure, so to speak. And from that will evolve the structure that we have. So when you look at a human body, every piece of that body, on a physical level, it looks like eyes and ears and a nose. Not just looks like, is. But it's rooted, so to speak, in the spiritual cosmic eyes and nose and mouth. And the same thing is with hair. Hair is not just hair. For us, what is hair? It covers the body. It grows on your head. If you have a beard, it's a beard. And then that's that. And then there's mitzvahs that tell us to touch the hair, not to touch the hair, what you should cut, what you can't cut, etc. But it's all based on something much deeper. It's based on Cyrus Lamaila, because above there's spiritual hair. Now, what is spiritual hair? Look at hair. If you study physical hair, it looks like strands, like thin wires. What are thin wires? They're in order to carry energy from a very high level to a lower level. So you could have a regular pipe, a regular conduit and channel, but if it has very intense energy and it has to go to a paradigm shift, so there's a concept of Tzimtzum, but the Tzimtzum also leads into thin wires, very thin conduits, channels, which is called Moisre Moichin, which is like Moisre means as the leftover. So Moichin is the brain itself, the mind itself in full intensity. But where is the hair? The most of the hair, at least on the head, grow. The major hair of a human being grows on the head. Why? Because the head has the most energy, because the divine cosmic mind, Chachmas Tima, we'll call the cosmic super conscious mind, has the most energy. Everything starts from Chesed and from Meiches Tima. But it's so intense, it can't go into Meiches Tima to Chachma Gluya and Meichim Gluyim without a very narrow channel. So the hair, which grows on the skull and on the beard, are different stages and different ways of the energy of the Meichin Stima traveling into consciousness of Chachma. So Chachma is only a spark. But how does it travel from the superconscious? Hair is the carrier of that. So essentially, in our case, in the human being, the hair is outside of the head. But if you visualize it in Chesed, it would look like this. Chachmas Tima is like a state of tremendous amount of compact energy in a concealed way. It's completely concealed. For it to come into a state of revelation, it's like strands of wires or hair that channels. So in a sense, the payas that come from the hair on top of the head into the beard is like those wires that are carrying Moisre Moichin from Stima to Gili. Now, we learned all this, by the way, in volume 2. There's a whole section just on this, on Cyrus. Just for the record, the Idra Zuta and the Idra Rabba, and the Idra Zuta, the two deepest and most cryptic parts of Zohar, which are referred to very often in Chesed. Idra Rabba was the larger group of the 10 students of Rashbi. Idra Zuta was the smaller group, smaller gathering of when after 3 of them passed away. Or the story of Lag Ba'omer and everything is spoken about in Idra Zuta. The big themes of these two parts of the Zohar are about hair. They talk about all the different levels of hair and how the energy travels through it. With Chassidus, you can start getting some semblance of understanding. So in volume 2, right in the middle there, he spoke at length about Cyrus and different levels, what the payas, the role of the Cyrus on the head, the payas on the side locks, and then the beard. The beard is what we're interested here because the beard is the Yud Gimel Tikkun Dikna. Even though we have more than 13 strands in the beard, but generally speaking, it's 13 channels. It says the Baal Shem Tov, you could actually see the 13 in his beard. They actually saw 13 parts because his beard was very similar to the way it was above. It says that in some Sfarim. But Yud Gimel Tikkun Dikna, which is essentially the 13 attributes of compassion, which is why a beard is such a holy thing, because it's the carrier of these energies. That's why it's called Sidus. Moshe Moichin is Sidus. So essentially, it's coming from a very high level, but it's going through a very narrow channel in order to be able to access it. So now, when Moshe is when Hashem, God is revealing to Moshe Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, this is the process, and he's going to explain now. But he's explaining with asking, first of all, we have to understand, to understand what we just learned, and also why they called 13 attributes of compassion Ma'ach Hashem Tzimtzumim Kamosh La'asayros. Since they're in a state of Tzimtzumim, which means very narrow, very limited flow, like Cyrus, here, the only thing here doesn't have an intelligence in it. If you touch a hair, you cut it, there's no pain, because it barely has a nerve. When you pull it, there's a little pain. So Chassidus explains, because it's attached to the meichin, to the nerves that connect to the mind. But it's very, very limited. Here is a very limited flow. So how do you say that something so powerful like the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, you're calling Yud Gimel Zamachim when at the end of the day it's a very diminished and minimized flow of energy, like the energy that flows through hair strands. And the root of their transmission of the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, which is essentially Yud Gimel Tikkun Dikna, which means Tikkun Dikna means Dikna is Zokan in Aramaic. So Tikkun Dikna would mean the features or the ornaments of the beard. So it could also mean Tikkun as in repair, but Tikkun is often referred, the Tikkunim are referred to like Tachshitim, like jewelry or ornaments. In this case, it's the appearance of the beard. So he says their root is Hu Mebchinas Tzur Shezel Bchinas Gevurah. As we just learned before, the root of this Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim is from the level of Tzur, with Sina de Kardanisa, which is the level of Gevurah, of intensity, of strength, of power. V'im Kain, and if that's the case, why they called the Midas Harachamim the attributes of compassion? So first of all, compassion seems to be not the same thing as Gevurah and Tzimtzum. And especially, it's known, they're Rachmim Pshutim. They're not just compassion. They're seamless compassion. They're shapeless. Rachmim Pshutim means endless compassion without any limits or definitions. Rachmim can be, plain Rachmim can be the level of Rachmim. You give Rachmanis, but it has definition, it has limits. How much compassion? Here you're talking about Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim opens up all the channels and God forgives, like we said yesterday from Rashi. He forgives even when the Schus Ovis is depleted. Still, the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim have the power to override that and forgive even the Chet Egel, even the gravest sins. So how do you reconcile that? How do you explain that is connected to that's rooted in Gevurah, and it's in the form of Tzimtzumim and Gevuros and Tzimtzumim and like Cyrus? That's what he wants to explain, these two sides of it. And here you call Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. Okay, so that's what we're going to now learn. Now, you could probably already guess the answer to the question because that's all what we've been learning here. that from the highest levels come the highest level has the power to go all the way into the darkest level. But let's not jump it. Before I continue, since I've been elaborating, anybody want to ask anything on, even though we have a question on the table, or want any clarification of what we've learned so far? By all means, please. So now he answers the question. Acha inyan hu. The inyan in this is, again, you see, Chesed doesn't just say yesh lemer or the teretz. There's the answer. It gives the inyan in it. So what's the inyan in all of this? Ki yadua, the Gevurah yesh by Beis pirushim. Gevurah has two meanings. Shein hofchim zeh mezeh, that are opposite from one another. Well, be'emes, however, in the parentheses he adds, but in truth, hein hoba hotalia. In truth, both these answers are interdependent. So ostensibly, they seem to be contradict two different opposite meanings, but in truth, they're interdependent and interconnected. So he's going to say like this. The first interpretation, and I'm really glad the Rebbe Rashab is doing this because I did explain the Gevurah, these two interpretations, but now it seems that Rebbe Rashab, I feel, is sensing maybe that we need explanation because Gevurah has been used in so many different ways. Is Gevurah strength? Is Gevurah weakness? Not weakness, concealment? Is it like severity and judgment? Is it the deepest levels above Helam Atzmi? So you have like, what is exactly is Gevurah here? You know, Chesed we learned is Gili, revelation, giving, flow. Gevurah we know is discipline, restraint, but we've also seen different dimensions in Gevurah. So he's now going to clarify all that. So he says, so the first interpretation in Gevurah, Aleph, the Gevurah hu inyan Tzimtzum. Gevurah is the inyan of Tzimtzum. The best translation of Tzimtzum, even though there's very hard one word, because Tzimtzum can mean contraction, it can mean condensation, it can mean limitation, it can mean concealment, concentration. They're all correct words. And but here he means Tzimtzum mostly limiting or constraining or restraint even. So let's see how he explains it. Shubchinas heder ha'ashpa. It means the refrain of transmission. Hashpa is chesed, is when you're mashpia something, you're opening the faucet, you're allowing to flow, the flow is going. Heder hashpa is the lack of flow. So it's holding it back. Refrain, restraint. There's probably other English words that work here as well. Ukamoi isha gvura, and he's going to give an example. Like a person of Gevurah, a person whose personality, a human being that you define, you say there's a Isha Chesed, a kind person, and then you have a person of Gevurah. Doesn't always mean bad. It means a person of discipline. It could be a person of restraint. So he says, what's a Isha Gevurah? Shu kamtsin betive. In his nature, he's stingy. Now, here stingy not necessarily mean in the terrible way, but kamtsin means he's measured. You know, it could be in the worst way, kamtsin is a stingy person. But kamtsin also means measured. Like let's say, like in any good company, you have the person who, like they create the budget. There's the person who knows how to spend, and the person who knows how to cut costs. Essentially, it's different personalities. Some people know how to, give and let it flow, and some people are much more controllers, which means controllers as in controlling the finances and making sure not overspending and so on. I'm just giving an example of what it would be. Now, kamtsin also, as I said, has negative implication. I'm not saying he's not referring to that as well, but we'll soon see where he's going with this. So that's Gevurah. Libli lahashpia el azulos. He's a kamtsin who's stingy, libli lahashpia, and therefore denies the hashpa to be mashpia to another. Heipach me'isha toiv ha'chesed. The opposite of a person, a good person, and a giving person, and a loving person, a kind person. Shurak lashpia luzulose. Isha teva chesed. His personality is one. Just it's all to be mashpia wherever he goes. You see a bal tzedakah. You see sometimes in families that one person is a bal tzedakah. They're always giving. Another person is always saying maybe we should give less, and is always very careful. Now, it could go in a negative way, like we said, a kamtsin to stinginess. but it doesn't have to be that way. It could also be. Here, again, I think it sounds like to me very negative the way he's describing it. I just don't want to limit it to that. That's why I'm making the qualification. The Rebbe Rashab is not distinguishing. Here it sounds very much that it's the opposite of goodness. It's more like Gevurah in a severe person, a very, not just a disciplined person, a person who is very difficult to get money out of, for example, or someone to give, who will not do a favor easily. And the Isha Gevurah, in this first interpretation of Gevurah, is the opposite. As was explained earlier. That's right. I don't remember exactly where. Maybe a good friend Yitzchak could do a little search, but I remember quite a while back, he spoke about these two personality types. I think it was in context of I don't remember the context. It was about, I think, the Midas, Chesed, Gevurah. Okay, I'll look it up if we don't find it, but if you can find it, fine. It's not emergency.
What's the search for?
Maybe Isha Gevurah or Isha Chesed, or I'm not sure if those were the words he used. Maybe Isha Gevurah, that would be the word I'd look for, probably. I think he used a different expression back then, but maybe not. I'm not sure. I remember. If you find it easily, don't. I know more or less where it is. Maybe, there's no need to first search it because it's pretty clear what he's referring to here. Okay. Now he's still in the first interpretation of Gevurah. Keep in mind. Umezeh hu hakas v'aregis, the Isha Gevurah hu mole dinin v'regis. Okay, it's clearly going more negative than I thought it was going. And from this is the source. From this is derived the anger, kas, and rage. Kas could be rage and anger. Kas and regis. The Isha Gevurah from a person who's a very severe person.
He talks about it a little bit on page 1230. Bottom of 1230.
Okay, let me look quickly. Let me look quickly.
I don't know if it's the same context at all, but it looks a little.
That's what related. I was referring to. Yeah, I remember it was on the right side and the bottom. Correct. So it is 1230. You got it.
Shin Daled has a whole paragraph on it. Aleph Shin Daled.
Oh, Shin Daled too. Okay. So fine, it could be more than one place. You're right. Okay, 1230 and 1304. Very good. Yeah, Midas HaKamtzonis, you're right. Okay, thank you for that. Well, I'll look it up later to see if there's anything to really. He's referring to it, so it's good to know, right? 1230, 1304. Okay. Okay, so now he continues. And from there comes the rage and the anger, or I said anger and rage. Which one? Kas is rage and reges is anger. So which one is which? Of Isha Gevurah, which is who mole shahu, the Isha Gevurah, the Isha Gevurah mole din v'reges. A person of Gevurah is filled with judgment and anger. That's his personality. A person of Chesed is always smiling, and always in a pleasant mode, and always in a giving mode. A person of Gevurah is the opposite. It's very limiting, control, and restraining, and that from that comes kas and regis. So that's the first interpretation in Gevurah. Now comes the second one, which he called before the opposite. And then he's going to say, Haba Atali, they're interdependent. Beis, the second interpretation in Gevurah, Huloshin Tagbeirus. It's from the word intensity. When you say Tagbeirus Achayis, or like he says, V'hu Adarabe, Tagbeirus Hashefa. This is the exact opposite. On the contrary, it means an intensity, an overflowing of the flow. So Tagbeirus Achayis means when a person, for example, needs a certain amount of strength to lift an object. Okay, but what happens if the object is twice as heavy? He needs to exert himself. Exertion requires more intense strength. So here, Gevurah is from the word strength, and not just strength, tagberis. So Gevurah here is referring to tagberis hashefa of an intensification, which is the exact opposite of what we just said. Gevurah before was limiting, was constraining, was restraining, and it translates into anger and a very, I would say, constrained state. A person is like withholding. Here, it's an addition, much more power, actually. Tagberis hashefa. This was also discussed earlier, by the way, when he spoke about the Gevurah of Esav and Yitzchak, if I recall correctly. So tagberis hashefa. Dihine anuroyim, because now we see. Yeah, this he said very clearly. Back, it could be where you said Aleph Shin. You said Aleph Shin Dalet. I'm almost sure. One second. Yeah, there was a section earlier where we spoke about at length that without Gevurah, that a person of Chesed will give kindness, but he won't fight for it. If there's any menagid, if there's any opposition, he'll withdraw, he'll retreat. So he needs tagberis, he needs Gevurah to fight, to push. So tagberis hashefa actually causes something to be more powerful. So he's saying now that, so we see, the Gevurah causes the shefa, the flow of the energy, to be stronger and more intense than when it's coming from chesadim alone, from kindness. He's now going to compare the difference between a wild animal and a cow, a domesticated animal, basically. A chaya and a behema. He says, we see physically with our eye that they're different. There's a very extreme difference between a very strong, far distance between them. A domestic animal, like a cow or a sheep or something like I don't know if sheep go in the category of behemoth, but like a cattle is the category bechinas chsadim. The mishum zeh gam k'may sheyarda b'derech nefila v'shvira. That's why even when they come down here below, not just in Ruchnius, when they come down below, b'derech nefila v'shvira, that's an expression of Chesed. When something doesn't just flow regularly, it falls down. In other words, it's like somewhat of a shift. So a regular flow would be, okay, there's a stream that's flowing, let's say water is flowing from a higher place to a lower place. But if something has to go to extreme state, sometimes it's called nefila, it falls. It's like falls out of place. And shvira means, obviously it's shattered. So it's coming from the nefila and shvira from toyu. Shvira sakelim. So it says, even when it comes below the behema, lo yarda rak b'klipas nega. So a domestic animal is only klipas nega, that's why it's kosher. In most cases. Is there a behemoth that's not kosher? Yeah, I mean, we're not talking about a behemoth that became treif, but we're talking about naturally kosher. Because it comes from the level of chesed. Kehelis Yankiv is another Kabbalah Sefer that is like an encyclopedia, similar to Ma'ir Eir. It goes in alphabetical order. It's from Yaakov Koppel, I think, or one of the Yaakov, one of them. It's a later Makubal. So in Kehelis Yankiv, he says, Hevi b'shem hazayar. He cites from the name, in the name of the Zayar, the Yud mine behemas, the 10 different type of cattle, nivru min chesed, were created from chesed. Okay, so that's a behemoth. We see in cattle a certain coldness, a certain lack of passion. It walks, they're very calm and they're very relaxed. They're very tameable. What's the word? They're domesticated. So they walk, they move, benachas ma'id. The ein zrizus klal behilucha. And you don't see any quick movements. You don't see them running, you don't see what you'll see, for example, in a wild animal. And also in all its movements, in eating and drinking, it's all ba'atzlus g'delahu, which is with a lot of laziness, slothfulness. In other words, everything is very relaxed and calm, like Chesed. You don't see that type of like a predator in its passion and so on. Okay, interesting piece here. V'hainu, why is that the case? Because v'hainu, and that because the v'hainu that is because mepnei, due to the fact sha'achayis bo mepchinas tzimtzum amiyut. Because though it's a behemoth, so it is Gevurah, but the energy, the vitality within it is in a more diminished and more concealed and diminished level. And even though an animal like that has a lot of power, we say which means much grain is produced when an animal plows the earth, much more than a human being, because the animal is a lot stronger. So with the power of the ox, you produce rav tfuas, an abundance of tfuah, of produce. Or like the expression kasher le'el, that you use an ox, you use an animal to carry weight, because they can carry a lot more than a human being can. So this seems to be, he just said that it's tzimtzum amiyut. Here it's koyach chayis, koyach gadol. So he answers, this energy is not revealed and expressed. It has power. An animal like that can carry a lot of weight and it has the power more than a human does. But it's not expressed like we're going to see in a minute about an animal. It's expression like you don't see, let's say a cow or another cattle, you don't see in them this intensity unless you know they're strong, but you don't see them behaving in a very aggressive way, essentially. And that's because these animals are from the level of chesadim. Actually, I said before Gevurah, so I correct myself. There's the level of chesadim, not the level of Gevurah. Uketeva hamayim. Chesed and mayim are the same thing. Mayim, like the nature of water, which is chesed, shein karim betivam. They're cool in nature. They're not heated and fiery and passionate. V'yeshbam kavdus, and they have a certain, kavdus means a certain weight, which means like in this case where he said that they're like weighted down. They're he called it lazy before, not just lazy, that they have this sort of slowness about them. But kavdus also means heaviness. So he means heaviness as not being agile or something like that. So he says, and because water has this weight, that's why it descends. If water was just weightless, it would not descend. It goes from higher to lower. Chaya, on the other hand, an animal. What he means by animal now, he means a wild animal, a non-domesticated animal, who mibchinas Gevurah is from the level of Gevurah. Aryeh begematria Gevurah, like a lion, is the same gematria as Gevurah, a lion. Ubamokamacha mashma. The mashakosov shepnei aryeh el hayamin. Now we know it says about the four faces of the Merkava of Yecheskel. In the chariot, he saw pnei aryeh, pnei sher, pnei nesher, pnei adam. So one of them is the face of an aryeh. And it says the face of Aryeh is El Yamin, to the right, which is Chesed. So the Rebbe Rashab is qualifying and saying, elsewhere it explains, mashma, it appears that when we say the face of the lion to the right, Hu Eira Gevurah b'klei Chesed. It's not a contradiction because it's the power of Gevurah that's in the container of Chesed. So that's why it's on the right. But it doesn't take away from the Gevurah of the Aryeh. Ubedivra maskul vayachilecha, vayachilcha. L'kutei Torah in Ekev and l'kutei Torah kosav sheba'aveda hu kechesim hamisapach. In Aveda, this level of the Aryeh is kechesim hamisapach, which means an inverted engraving. So when you make a chesim hamisapach, when you take, let's say, like a king's ring, signet ring, where he would use to sign a contract. So in those days, or even today, you take wax. So the ring, or today, what do we call it? Like a corporate seal, the seal. So the seal has two sides to it. On one hand, it has to protrude in order to make an inscription or an engraving in the engraving. And on the other hand, when it does make that engraving, that impression, the impression is the other way. It's embedded like a chesem amisapach. So a chesem, which is a seal, can be two ways. It could be a seal that protrudes, or it could be a seal that is, what's the opposite of protruding? It's like inverted, not inverted. Protruding is sticking out. The other would be like embedded, not embedded. When something is like, what's the opposite of protruding? Inverted. Anyway, he says that's a form of Gevurah. Chesed is protruding because it's flowing forward. Chesed amisapach means an inverted seal, and that's the level of Gevurah. That's what the Likutei Torah says. So this is animal. L'chein hilucha b'zrizus g'dela. That's why it walks, or its movement is with very, very quick. V'chol tnuaseh, and all its movements is kamoi b'chefza lechel kamoi. All its movements, like, for example, its desire to eat, who b'slavas g'dela. It's with great passion and fiery passion, with great passion. Like an animal, like say you take a cow grazing in a meadow, it's very slow. It eats grass slowly, slowly. Look at a predator, how they tear apart a prey. It's not exactly, it's the exact opposite. So we see from this, tagbeirus achayis, an intensity. Because it has this tremendous energy coming from the world of Gevurah. Okay. Because of the time, I think I'm going to stop here. He's going to still continue speaking about the intensity of a chaya. But the point here is, with the second interpretation of Gevurah is the opposite of the first one. The first one, it's limited flow, restraining to the point of constraining, even to the point of anger, like he said, and kas and reges, anger and rage. Here, the second interpretation is the opposite. It's intensity, much stronger intensity than chesed. So we're in the middle of the second interpretation. That's what we'll stop here. I'll stop here by the 4 lines from the bottom. Ba'avedus HaKedesh, he's going to continue to talk about chayis, achaya. Then he's going to come back to our discussion here. But this is going to go, I see, a good few pages. So let's all be patient. But remember, I'm talking Chesed and Gevurah, so clearly it's part of the theme of the sweetening of Gevurah through Chesed, and then the transformation of Gevurah from within Gevurah, which is all part of this discussion. So this is not a tangent at all. This is very much addressing transforming Gevurah from within Gevurah. But now you can understand that there's the Gevurah that's just concealment, and then there's the Gevurah that's intensity. And when you transform that, you can imagine the transformation is quite a powerful one. But we'll learn all that. So I'll stop here, take any questions, and then we'll, Does anybody want a clarification about anything?
I think there is a mimer from the Rebbe about Yitzchak that's called Tigvoires HaChasodim.
Yeah. Well, you don't need the Rebbe. It starts already in Alter Rebbe's Maimorim. The Rebbe may be quoting it, but it's not a chiddush from the Rebbe. Do you know which mimer you're referring to?
I don't remember exactly what. Maybe it's connected with Yitel Lecho HaElokim.
Could be. Yeah, we're going to learn about this later, by the way. If you look on page 1336, he's going to talk about Yitzchak in this context. We're going to talk about the Gevurah of Yitzchak. He discussed it also earlier, right here, page 1289. We took Tagbeirus HaChasodim, I think he said there. Yeah. 1289. all connected. Okay, any other comments, questions? Okay, if not, we'll stop here. Bottom of page 13.